Welcome to the ResearchWorks podcast, brought to you in association with the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dayna
and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and we're here to interview world-leading researchers, clinicians, and people with lived experience
to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
And welcome to the Tell It to Ed podcast. Actually, note to producer Ed, replace the light and poppy intro music to some heavy metal music with some guitar solos. But I digress. So I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Dayna, and filling in for Dr. Ash, who said she wanted nothing to do with this episode. I'm kidding, of course, Marissa Smith.
Hello.
It's finally happened.
I know, I'm very excited for this.
I do feel a little bit nervous and slightly on the wrong side, because normally we're asking the questions.
I know, and I don't have a screen in front of me. I don't know what we're going to get asked.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I had threatened to start my own show, but Ash and Dayna had said that they'd pay me twice what I'm on now, and I even negotiated my own episode for the season, so here we are. So I guess this episode, we're going to be interviewing the interviewers on all things research.
Finally, someone's
yes, I'm excited.
I don't really know what to say, but and because Ed's questions are usually a little bit, left field, I don't really know what to expect, but they're usually really insightful.
They're very in-depth. I'm always impressed.
We'll probably discuss something pretty good, hopefully.
That's okay. We'll start with like an icebreaker-esque question.
Copycat.
Yeah. So, we have to keep with the style of the show.
Okay, sure.
So, I'm going to say that podcasting isn't a full-time gig for the ResearchWorks crew. Well, at least not yet. But I guess my first question is going to be, what do you guys do when you're not hosting the podcast?
Oh, okay.
Can you go first?
I can go first, yeah. Well, the only reason why that relates is lately when I've been going to some of the conferences, people think that I do this as a full-time job, and I'm like, oh, really? And it's really not a full-time job. This is just a little side project, really, that we started a few years ago. My role really is as a researcher. I am also the clinical lead of Healthy Strides, and so I write lots of grants and design studies, and I support the team on their clinical fidelity of the intervention. So we translate. I literally practice what we preach. So we put all the latest knowledge in research into practice, and if it changes, we change as well. So we mold all of our programs in that kind of way. So I'm really hands-on. And I do a lot of work in mentoring and sort of leadership sort of stuff within the team. And started Healthy Strides Malaysia. So that team's been going for a few years now. So I support them quite frequently. And I wrote a book. There we go.
That's a lot.
That's a lot in a very short amount of time.
Basically, your weeks are very full.
They are very, very full, but they're great. They're really good. Like, I'm actually on leave. I've had 2 days leave. Today's a leave day. And, but, I'm really loving being in here. I'm not wearing my uniforms, but I'm still feeling pretty good, and I love being here. So the days are full and busy, and it's been grant writing season. So I've been writing grants probably nonstop for the last 3 months now. Which is a big part of being a researcher is to maintain the research work that you want to do, and no pun intended, maybe, I don't know, and to plan for the future for new research ideas. But the podcast probably takes a good amount of time still in terms of planning and contacting researchers, and me reading papers myself in areas that I don't necessarily read in, just naturally, and preparing for it. So it's pretty fun. Podcast is just a side hustle, I guess. And we have another podcast too. So a co-host, Therabytes podcast, which is with a lovely lady named Kate, and the previous season was Marissa, and it's with a family member. So it's all about trying to make research more accessible for parents, because a lot of parents will listen to the ResearchWorks podcast. And I thought, we probably should make one more specifically for parents. So busy full days though, but it's been great. And I get to spend a lot of time with you, Marissa.
I know, I'm lucky. But
nice answer.
What I love that you combine clinical and research so well. And then I kind of say ResearchWorks comes off that, but it's kind of like a combination of those things.
It is, yeah.
Because that's your knowledge translation and getting it out there.
Yeah, kind of all combines. So, that's probably the nicest way to explain explain what I do. It's a bit of both and put it all together.
Very cool.
Your days look pretty full as well, though.
Yeah, my days are busy. So I work as the clinical coordinator at Healthy Strides, and also I'm a physio by background. But these days, more of a non-clinical role. So I guess I help families from when they start coming to our service, from an assessment and intake perspective, along their journey, and then also again as they finish programs with us and for future planning and things like that, and all other things in between. So I guess it's just trying to use my clinical experience in helping to support families and provide the best recommendations and advice.
It's really cool.
Forward.
Yeah.
I love my role. It's such a privilege. I genuinely enjoy coming to work.
You do a great job with it as well. And I think a big part, what we talk about a lot is communication. It is talking to families about research and exploring those ideas together. Yeah.
I feel very passionate about it, and I have 2 children, so I do work part-time. So my 3 days when I'm here are very full. But I'm grateful that I've had those other days as well for my children. And I guess it also gives me that perspective and from other things with my kids in terms of like liaising with parents and what they're balancing and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. It's a really, really unique and privileged place to be. Yeah.
No, I'm grateful. Yeah.
Now, it would be remiss of us not to include the absent Dr. Thornton in this, what she does when she's not hosting the podcast.
Well, I mean, I can only answer part of that for her because she lives a very busy life as well. She is the mother of 3 children, and she is currently on maternity leave, and she still comes in to do the podcast, which is pretty incredible. Every now and then she does leave her little baby here with one of us, so everyone's very keen to do some babysitting. So at the moment she's on mat leave, but she's the research manager and coordinator at Perth Children's Hospital. So she manages a lot of research that gets done within a tertiary setting, mostly around knowledge translation involving consumers, and a lot of supervision of high degree research students. So she is very full as well. I mean, she works part-time and like with you, has a lot to juggle within home, but she does it remarkably well and with such grace, and she's pretty incredible. Yeah, so we're really lucky that she comes in as often as she does with her kids. It's amazing.
And she brings such a wealth of research knowledge and background.
Yeah.
I love listening to her.
Yeah, she's so great. So good. Yeah.
All right, well, that's enough of the light and fluffy stuff. And I think I'll put in like a heavy metal transition tune now.
Gosh.
And then we'll go into the real meat of today's episode. All right. So, question number 1. Well, question number 2, but my question is, what does evidence-based practice mean to you guys? And my question, the Tell It to Ed part of all of this is, what's the difference between evidence-based practice and evidence-informed practice?
Okay. Do you want to talk about what evidence-based practice means to you first?
Yeah, sure. So evidence-based practice is when there's solid scientific evidence to support a practice. And when you think about approaches to things, and I've been listening to lots of podcasts lately in lots of different areas, but whether it's, nutrition or therapy-based or medical, we can always make assumptions, but we can never know unless we do scientific research.
Yes.
So evidence-based practice is when you have high-quality scientific research that supports the practice of, in our field, it's the intervention or what we're providing.
Yes.
And I guess whether it's for the parents especially, but for the children, you want to know that when they're coming to therapy, talking from our context, that they're having the best approaches, that the time you're using is going to have the best outcome. And so to have evidence and scientific research to support that knows that you're on the money.
Yeah.
Because if you were doing anything else, it's not the best.
Yes.
And I think of, whether it's if you were taking medicine for something or whatever it might be, you would want to know that you're taking the best because you're most likely to get the best outcomes.
That's right.
So I know that's how I kind of see it in terms of therapy. There's lots of different approaches out there and there's lots of ways to doing things. We know that for consistency, it's best to do the one approach. And if you're going to do an approach and you're going to be, engaging in therapy, you want it to be evidence-based to maximize the best results.
Yeah, I love that. And you've brought it right back down to the people that it's meant to be for. And I guess that's the definition of evidence-based practice. There's 3 parts to it. And Andrew Whitehouse spoke about it so beautifully. Ida Novak talks about it as well. Like everyone talks about it because we know there's 3 components. And the first one is the scientific evidence, what the research actually shows. So we actually know the cause and effect, understanding what it is. And then to apply it is the clinical wisdom and the experience that you might have. And then finally, the third part is all about the families, the consumers, whoever's going to be the recipients of it. And they all get combined. But what's really clear and really important is that it must be always that scientific evidence is the biggest part of it, because that way that can tell you as a clinician what you need to do. But if you're then using clinical experience and you deem that more than scientific evidence, that's when you start getting into an area where it tends to be a little bit more anecdotal. It is based on opinion and experience. You don't actually know the ingredients of why something might be working or not to make any decisions. So I guess that's the difference between evidence-based versus evidence-informed. Evidence-informed probably implies a lot more of the clinician's opinion and experience. Not to say it's not useful, but it should never be bigger than the scientific evidence, because you brought it down to the real factor of the people and the consumers. If we're going to stand in front of someone and say, this is going to be the best because we know this, we know that there's no side effects or none of these factors will happen, and I'm going to apply that for you so you can get the best outcome. And that's evidence-based practice. And that's why it's so important, because we've got to be really ethical with the funds that we have available. It's always limited, time, and we don't want to take away precious time for a child doing something we don't know any effect for. Yeah, we have enough scientific evidence now to show what things do work, so it would be, I see it as being unethical to not apply that, because parents come to you relying on you as a clinician, as an expert, to give them that kind of feedback. So, yeah, I think that's really important, and I can't begin to stress that enough.
No, me too. Yeah. And the evidence changes. I think of when we first started in physiotherapy, it was the approaches were different.
Yes.
And we've definitely had to change with the evidence. And I look back to the things I was doing and the practices that we were using, more, I guess, passive treatments, very much.
Handling.
Neurodevelopmental therapy, different approaches that we were utilising back then. And I think, we've had to change with the evidence, and it's almost like a maturation of our skills as well.
So true.
But I see now the impact of having this functional, task-specific training, being active, all these things we talk about all the time, and I see the impact of that, and that is where the evidence is.
That is such strong evidence. So to decide to not apply that, your rationale needs to be so incredibly strong, and I don't see where there is a rationale there when you're offering it as a service. As a health professional, I mean, we're all held by a code of conduct. It doesn't matter which country you're from. As a health professional, there is a code of conduct. And within that, I guarantee you, no matter what country you're from, it's that you will apply the best practice. Best practice can only be informed by the science. And, do the research, find out the outcomes. We can still generate new knowledge, definitely do that, but we do it as a community together as researchers, and we evaluate and we critique and we provide feedback, and that's how this area gets stronger and stronger. But yeah, I remember the early days when I think I taught you some neurodevelopmental therapy because I was Bobath trained.
I remember.
We did it. Yep. And then that's what we were taught. That's what it was like. That was meant to be the gold standard. But one, the research didn't show it. And really, when I was really evaluating what I was doing, like the kids weren't necessarily any better when my hands were off them. The minute my hands came off them, I was like, oh, right, just kinetic movements are there and I haven't changed anything. So there was a bit of that self-evaluation as well. So it's a process.
It's a big process.
Big process, yeah.
Wow. Well, I think you're kind of preaching to the choir at this point, though, because I think everybody who is tuning into ResearchWorks is kind of this-minded. But I think that's a great foundation for the rest of the pod and what we're looking at. So I guess of all the topics that we've covered over the last 4 seasons, and maybe particularly in this last season, in the last couple of conferences that we've been to, what do you think is the most influential piece of work, or what's had the most impact? And I guess the Tell It to Ed section of this is what seems to have been overlooked?
Okay. I would go back to, like, episode 26 really sticks with me. And the fact that I remember the episode,
so what is
probably
episode 20?
tells
You might
you
need to tell
a
me.
whole lot. Like it's been nearly 200 episodes. So I've spoken to nearly 200 incredible people, and everything has been aligning, and it's incredible work. And episode 26, actually, we did that one together. That was when we talked to Egmar Longo and Ana Carolina de Campos in Brazil.
That's the exact one I was going to say.
I
remember the night we did it.
We did it, yes. So a bit of an FYI story. That night, we came in on a Friday night. Ed wasn't around because, unfortunately, I think you were in hospital or something. I was. Yeah, and I had to bring in all the podcast gear.
You did a very good job, though.
I did a great job, apart from the fact that because I was so panicked that night trying to do so much, I didn't park my car properly and I tore up the front bumper of my car.
I do, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I came in, I was like, I've really stuffed this up. Anyway, so there's plenty of things there that make that night very memorable. But it was a worthwhile episode discussion, and because we share it, it's probably for the same reason. I loved what they had written in the journal of physiotherapy in Brazil, and there was the title was "Let's make pediatric physical therapy evidence-based. Let's use the latest science." And I thought, well, isn't that what we're meant to do? And they wrote out and said there are all these techniques, and they're really talking about Cuevas Medic at the time, and really just highlighting that doesn't have any evidence to support it at all. There's only 2 case series on it that, has no controls whatsoever, and really highlighting that there's so many great techniques and approaches based on science. And then Igmar says the most amazing thing when she's like, it's like a dance. Evidence-based practice is like a dance. When the music and the rhythm changes, we change. And I think that has stuck with me since then, because I can be attached to anything, and I realize that as it changes, it's actually just not about me, and there might be approaches I really like, but I'm happy to move forward as well, because that's the best thing for children. Mm-hmm. So I reckon that's why I love it.
I love that. That's exactly the thing I was going to say. I vividly remember that, only because even in our own professions that we've talked about, we also had to shift how we were doing it. And it was that thought of dancing and moving with the evidence. And then that way, instead of being aligned with any specific practice, you're actually aligned with just evidence-based.
That's right, yes.
And so that was a huge thing, just to realise to where we've come from and how we've been directed and changed in terms of what we're using from an intervention perspective. Yeah. But another one I love is Peter Rosenbaum.
Oh,
when you spoke to him,
episode.
I mean, he speaks so many words of wisdom, and what he's contributed is incredible. But those F words are amazing, and I think that's really redefined as well in terms of how I think about things when interacting with family and what we're doing, and they're all incredible, each of those F words and what they bring. So that was an incredible podcast, particularly when we talk about function, because obviously there's friends and fitness and family, all those other things they're all equally important. But when we talk about function and thinking about how do we maximize the children we see their function in a way that's going to work for them, it doesn't have to be the way that all of us do it.
That's right.
And that's something also from consumer podcasts that you've done at the AUSA CPDM as well, and hearing from
Carol.
Carol
Schrader.
Hearing from families and people living with cerebral palsy, and realising that, do you know what, it's not, they don't have to necessarily do things like you or I, or, it's just having a way of them learning to function and do things that are important to them.
That's right.
So whether, they might not be as interested in being in their walker for 100% of the day, it might be in their chair for more, so that they can have more time for gaming and education or things that are important to them. So it's looking at functioning and how we can best help the child or adult to function, not as you or I might see it, but as how they want to see it.
Yes.
And I think that was a huge shift as well.
Yeah. So important. I think Emily Pryor spoke about that one really, really well. About, it's like I wake up each day and think about what shoes I'm going to wear, like what we might think about. And she's like, well, I work out whether I want to use crutches or whether I want to use this or my wheelchair, and I just plan for my day, and it's their life.
Yeah,
and
it
like
has
Carol
to be driven
says,
by them.
we have to get out of their way.
Yeah, it was Carol actually. Carol was the big one in that, in terms of, do you know what, let them go. I think she was saying with her son, trying to find him a hobby and an interest, and he found one that was very left of field, and she was like, well, we're going down that path. And so it's not our wants, it's not our direction, it's their direction.
Yeah.
And then future as well, that's one that really sticks out. I've worked with adults with cerebral palsy as well, and we know there's issues with, there can be issues with pain and declines in mobility as people get older. So it's having that in the back of the mind as we're seeing children as clients as children, what we can do to minimise these things. And
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. And I think the part that Ed, I think you're asking about what's been missed. I would say the part that we probably don't talk about enough of is probably like maturation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why we need to do studies, right? Because children, and this sounds so obvious when I say it, and it seems so silly as well, but children naturally develop and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that regardless of whether you have a neurodisability or a diagnosis of some sort, your body is still changing and growing. There's still development that happens. Regardless of the mechanism of injury, because they're not staying as infants forever. They're still developing. So if you're going to apply an intervention at the time, you have to make sure that the intervention we're providing is better than maturation.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you might as well not do anything at all and enjoy life and still get the benefits of natural maturation. So I think the reason why, coming back to the question of why evidence-based practice is so important, is because we want to make sure what we're doing is better than natural development. And that means we're using time properly. It means we're using our resources properly, and we're being really responsible with that. So that's why the single group studies are good starts, but they're not enough. Yeah. We don't show enough of that. We need to do proper clinical trials to go actually compare this to that. And that's why your own clinical experience, as wonderful and rich as that will be, especially if you've got 20 or 30 years of experience, then naturally there would be you're just looking at one child on its own. You're not comparing to what natural maturation might have been for that person. So we have to be really responsible with that. And I just don't think we talk about that enough, which is, a big reason why early intervention is such an important phase. We need to make sure we can discern what's going to happen naturally.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't thought about it too much till we started having discussions a few years ago more about it. I was like, of course, these kids are going to mature and develop as well.
That's right.
And we know with GMFCS curves and things like that,
that's
how
right.
children develop, but it's hard to know. You want to then take that apart from the effect of the therapy.
You do.
And,
you really have to. And look, we see that because we have our centre in Malaysia, and there's a lot of, and I've been working there for over 10 years now, working with the local communities, and you do see what no intervention looks like. And for some children, as you see them over the years, you come back and you go, oh, you're talking now, and oh, you're walking now. And there is a natural history that does happen, and we haven't done anything there. But if you do something, does it mean that they can walk faster compared to where they would be, which means they can get to classroom? There's got to be a value add to what we do, because I love our profession so much. I want it to shine where it's meant to shine. Yeah.
Love that.
Brilliant stuff. And you even segued into what was going to be a later question in the show about maturation. So I like that it went there.
Okay, cool.
It was a nice little trip down memory lane as well.
Episode 26.
Episode 26.
That poor bumper got replaced.
The one that I wasn't involved with is your favourite. Wow.
Look, I was very
I think
panicked.
I'm going to go off and start my own show
very,
anyway.
very panicked with all the buttons and the putting things in the right plugs.
I vividly remember.
I was very stressed. We do love that you're here. I don't have to think about the tech side of things. So I just want to really reiterate that. I don't want to do that again.
I'm feeling valued.
Yeah, good.
So the next question then. So I guess I wanted to cover off things like motor and cognition. It's been a part of the language over the last, over the last season, I guess. It's been more prevalent in what I've been picking up in the episodes. And it ideally seems to go hand in hand. So my question is, what should clinicians and researchers be focusing on? From a research and clinical perspective, like, is one more important than the other, or is it like a perfect amalgamation of the two?
Do you want me to go?
You can go first, yeah.
I think there is an amalgamation of the two.
I think so,
because one is beneficial to the other, and I think, by children building in their cognition and their engagement and their motivation and all of those things, they can then have the desire to move and explore, which gives them freedom to only continue to build on their cognition and learning and experiences. I think in terms of the research world, and from what I know even at AusA CPDM, in terms of there's lots of research being done in terms of adapting toys and play so that it can really lead to developing cognition and providing different opportunities for the children and clients that we work with. And obviously it's just so important because children need to have the desire to move and the desire to want to explore. And so part of cognition is us getting to their level and what it is, whether they're playing at a level of cause and effect or whether they want to play with pretend play. And at the end of the day, they're children. So they do want to play. They don't want to do work.
No.
Isn't there quote that their work is to play?
That's right. So lovely.
So
At what age does that stop?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say 12 the demands increase, but really until you're 18 you should run with it. Play in different ways. But I think it really goes together, you know.
Does,
and as our roles in terms of physios, it's incorporating that play and cognition and engagement to provide the motivation to move. You develop mobility skills that then can increase your opportunities to develop your cognition.
Yeah.
By providing opportunities for socialisation and being upright and play.
Yeah.
So I feel like the two and two go together.
Yeah.
And it's just meeting the child with where they're at in terms of providing the appropriate play and toys.
I like that.
And
I think the only reason why we need to talk about the two together is I think traditionally the focus has been so much on developmental milestones focused on maybe just gross motor. So you go through your checklist and go, are they sitting? Are they crawling? Are they creeping? Are they pulling to stand? And there's a lot of that sort of focus, almost a hyper focus on milestones, which means that you kind of can sometimes accidentally just really focus on the motor. Whereas, like you said, the two go hand in hand together. And, think about mobility being a human right. The reason for that is because we also know that socio-emotional, cognitive, communicative development is nestled within mobility experiences. And they talked about that so beautifully in that paper. And then I think about the fact that if you want to see neuroplasticity for all of us, it doesn't matter who we are, we need to have two really essential components for that process to occur. One is you need to have active engagement, and then you have to be motivated to do so. So it doesn't matter whether we are learning a new language, whether we're learning to drive a car, whether we're learning to take some steps by ourselves. We need to be actively engaged and we need to be motivated. Those are the two things that we need to definitely have. And for that to happen, you have to have cognition and motor ability. So you need to be able to meet them where they're at, just like you said, whether it's with a walking frame, whether it's with a power wheelchair. It is all about making sure we can combine the two, because if we can keep building that and you can become more motivated, then you keep learning. And that's ultimately what we want. It's all about the learning experiences to be the best person you can possibly be. You don't want to be the person that just can do a few motor skills in a clinical environment and go, wow, that was great. We actually want to do it to bridge the gap to live life to your absolute max. And I think that's why the two and two are so important together. Can't separate them.
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. You passed that question. Very good. I guess I've got a lead up to that, though. Obviously, research and that clinical application of research in like a therapy setting is supposed to be the enabler for living a more fulfilled and empowered life, I guess. So what's your best advice for helping families to achieve a balance between therapy and, I guess, the other aspects and regular parts of life?
Can I take this
You
one?
want to go? Yeah,
I'll
go for it.
Because I feel like I've been talking about this the last few weeks.
Yep.
I view therapy as being more seasonal in nature, which means that there will be times where you need more of an emphasis on something because there's a life situation that needs a little bit more support, like, you're getting to school, sports carnivals coming up, or you have, you're transitioning from primary school to high school. So there's these particular events where it's important, when there's a massive growth, and so that muscle strength might reduce during that time. So you might want to really focus on it. It's seasonal. And if you view therapy as being more seasonal, then you can really start to look at your life as a whole. It's like going on holidays. You don't unfortunately get to go on holidays all the time. They're seasonal. You get to do them and they refresh and replenish you for the rest of life. And that's how we can keep that balance, because there's no way you can keep doing a high level of intensity of practice in a setting that is in a therapeutic setting without that catching up with you. So if you view it seasonally, you get these skills, you integrate it into everyday life. That's where being in the community is really important. I don't think weekly or fortnightly sessions are necessarily the way to go if you want to look at extending the time that you need for therapy, because you don't necessarily need weekly touch-ins. You might do right at the beginning, but as you're going through school, you might just be fine because the teacher's already trained. Everyone around that person already knows what they need to do. You can pull out for a little bit and then come back in again when you need it again. It's more about, tap and go rather than like all the time.
Yep.
And so I think we view it like the same way as holidays, is you don't do it all the time. You do it throughout the year. It's seasonal and it does its job and it boosts you for that next phase of life and then continue again. That's how I see it.
I love that. And I think if that's driven by a really specific goal, that would be my other advice. So whatever your child is engaging in, you think about what are they working on?
Yeah.
Especially if sessions are occurring at school and the parents aren't there, what are they working on?
Yes.
And is that dosage or that amount going to have an impact? And if not, do we need to look at changing the dosage? And, community teams looking at equipment and educating staff at schools and obviously educating families as well is of high importance. But when it comes down to actually receiving therapy to improve a skill, exactly like you said, seasonal with a very specific goal, it's targeted. We know then we can make the gains, which can then just be consolidated and I guess
that's right,
maintained as part of everyday life.
That's right. And part of that, I'm so glad you brought about the dosage, is that's equally as important, right? So the reason why we talk about this so much is I always give the analogy of antibiotics. Like we know the dosage for certain antibiotics. If you go under it, you know that you're going to be in trouble and you'll probably get that chesty cough come back again in the next week. You can go too much and then you'll just have a really bad belly for a few weeks as well. So you don't want to go too much, but you don't want to go too far under either. You want to get the just right amount to achieve that goal. Because otherwise all the work you would have done, if it's not enough, you haven't used that time well. If you do too much, then you've been taken out of school or life too much. You want to figure out the right dosage, which is where science comes in again. And if you can be really specific with that, you can use your time really efficiently, no waste of time. You're not always in therapy sessions. You get the most out of it when you need it.
And I think for parents as well, obviously parents are very busy, and especially when they've got kids and multiple kids with complex needs and going to different therapies and appointments, and really just coming back to, what are we working on? How is this? What is our main goal here?
Yeah.
Is this the right dosage and is this the right timing? And then at times that means that parents can really take a step back from having so many therapy commitments.
Yeah.
So they can enjoy time as a family or balance out other things. They're not having to bring all their kids into
just develop their own careers and their pathways as parents, which is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Thanks, Ed.
So I guess I've got another question now. And the pod recently won an award for a Transformative Practice Award. I guess it was about contributing to making research very accessible to people. And so my question's about communication. And I understand that communicating the benefits of research can be really hard. And there's a great responsibility to not overstate benefits of discoveries and interventions. And it's really carefully managed when you're speaking with researchers. They're very guarded and very...
this might suggest a significant improvement.
That's right. So how do you talk about non-evidence-based practices versus the evidence-based practices, and especially with families?
Yeah. Look, I think it's your first point about, not overstating things and being, the reason why we do that is because nothing is ever a sure thing. And that's probably such a, that language does us a disservice sometimes, because if someone's really confident about something, but they're not held by like a scientific standard, it's really easy to go, man, this completely fixes the whole thing, right? So it's really hard to compete with that. It's also really hard to compete with what the image of therapy might look like. I think there's, social media these days is very visual, right? So you get to see a lot of it. And our impression of what therapy looks like sometimes is the hard yards, and it's the, maneuvering a child to do something in a certain kind of way. And whereas the hands-off therapy approach, you sort of, you're further back, the child's doing most of the work. And so the image of that, I think there's something to be said about that and what people might expect. So already coming into this, there needs to be so much education about why the research says what it says. And we need to talk about those principles far more than anything else, because that is where the understanding of the why becomes really important. And so I guess that's how I explain things. I know you talk to families a lot as well, Marissa, but I guess my approach is a lot about the why. And so one of the things I've started talking about a lot lately is just starting to talk about like the top-down approach versus the bottom-up approach. So the bottom-up approach tends to be a lot of the non-evidence-based interventions still are quite bottom-up, and that's how we used to think. So, I understand that because that's how we were taught. It was like, if you can work on spasticity first, fix that, fix muscle strength, get them stronger, improve their balance, do that first, make sure they can open their hand and, work on that first. And once you've got all of those skills together, they'll then be able to do the task that you hope them to do. And we then realized it was really wishful thinking and it didn't happen. I remember people saying, if you want to learn how to do a push-up, you just got to do a push-up. If you want to learn how to ride a bike, you've got to ride the bike. So that means top-down approach. So you got to start with the actual task and learn how to do the task. Now, that is evidence-based because you're actually learning how to do the task. It's how your brain works. It's how your brain learns. And if you do it that way, it's the most efficient method because if you go bottom-up, number one, we know it doesn't translate. You might have slightly better strength, better balance maybe, but then you still have to learn the task. So now you've got this whole other path that you have to do as well. It's not as efficient, not as effective. So the top-down approach, and it's really giving people an example of how they might learn. You might learn how to drive a car. You don't learn how to drive a car by just practicing the clutch, practicing the gear changes. You don't just do that. You actually have to put the whole thing together. You might be the best gear changer in stationary possible, but doesn't mean you're a good driver. You still have to do it with everything around you in real life because that's the whole point. So it's kind of trying to explain top-down versus bottom-up approach and relating it to how their brains work because everyone's brains are the same in that way and how they learn.
I love that. That's what I was going to say. I just explain it in terms of how we learn. And how we learn, we have to be active. And
active and engaged.
They're the two biggest things. Because if we're doing all the work for them, they're not actually learning the skill. And I always get things like driving a car or whether it's riding a bike or any of those things. It's important. Even if it was to learn a language or learn a cognitive skill, you still have to be active. If you're passive, we know that we can tune out when we're listening to certain things. You have to be active.
You do.
And interested and motivated.
You do.
So it's just educating families on that and how we learn and then how that impacts our practice.
Yeah. And that's why back to languages, that's why the immersive method is the best. You just actually go there and practice talking, conversation. It's the fastest way to do it, right? Otherwise, you could sit at home with your phone and an app and just learn the different sounds and the sounds. And this is what I need to do. And you're not actually having a conversation with someone. So that's bottom up. You're learning those little tones, but you're not practicing it. And that's what the non-evidence-based approaches are. We just know we don't learn that way. We know so much now. And that's the thing. You're like, come on. We actually know so much more about how the brain works. And we have these discussions and debates and almost these arguments about which one's better. I'm like, well, we actually know how the brain works. Let's use that knowledge and apply it. And so I talk less about brands. I only talk about brands when they really come up to talk about, what approaches they might use. But at the end of the day, top down, this is what it needs to be. And the final component about neuroplasticity is engagement and motivation, but then it's also rest and sleep because we know that's when all the connections strengthen from a neuroplasticity perspective. So you also have to make sure you have adequate rest through all of it as well, which is normal life. You can't be practicing it all the time. Yeah.
Very good advice.
Thanks.
I love all this talk about the whole active approach thing. And I guess, and you touched on how brands are not so much not so important. It's more about like the principles of things and what's behind it. And I guess we've covered manual facilitation techniques as a blanket topic. But on our website, we actually have a very specific section on there about DMI, the dynamic movement intervention. And I guess their claims where they're standing at the forefront of neuroplasticity and research in the field, like given the consensus on a more hands-off approach, where does the research community as a whole kind of stand on this topic?
Unfortunately, it's not really well discussed. I think this is also a problem is that we don't have these discussions enough. And it was great that after we spoke with Leanne Setsushki and Sarah Reedman about Habitil, we talked about crying in therapy and how we really don't want kids to cry, and there's certain conditions that we need to really think about, you know, an early intervention, all that kind of thing in terms of protecting that child's well-being. And that started a conversation, and I was actually really happy that the founders of DMI then put a comment on our Instagram post and said, you know, presented their perspective on why crying is okay. And so we then put that on our website so that we could have like a more productive blog discussion. And unfortunately, after our replies, there wasn't anything back from it. And I was really hoping we could just have really respectful conversations. It certainly started off that way. And it is always worth the discussion, because at the end of the day, you know, you can make whatever claims you want to make, but it has to be backed by evidence and science. And unfortunately, at the moment, there is still nothing published about dynamic movement intervention. And the reason why we do want to make sure we talk about it is because it doesn't matter how many followers you might have on Instagram or testimonials you might have, there's still no scientific evidence to talk about what are the active ingredients, what are they actually doing, what are the long-term outcomes, because at the end of the day, if you're applying it in an early intervention context, you are essentially doing something that's very, very different to what our evidence currently says. So you don't want to be doing something that has no idea what the long-term outcomes might be, yet we do have evidence-based practice principles right there and then. So this is the difference between evidence-informed and evidence-based practice, is that we do have evidence-based practice principles right there for early intervention, and we have to use them. And if you're training people to do a technique that has no evidence to support it, you've got to be really careful, because these are people's lives. These are children. They're going to grow up to be, you know, functioning people in our community. We want them to be well and healthy and have every opportunity for them. And there just needs to be more discussion about it. And I see it on social media all the time, and people go, oh, how do I improve head control? Have you tried DMI? And I'm like, well, there's no evidence to say that works at all. So let's be really careful what we're recommending. And this is an adult conversation that you need to have. It's not a personal conversation, you know, about personal opinions. This is about what is published and scientific. And at the end of the day, as clinicians, like I said before, there is a code of conduct, and we have to make sure we take that seriously for our profession and use the evidence. That's all I can say about it. But it's not often spoken about because people feel a bit cautious to talk about it, and I get it. I was like that as well. I feel like unless we talk about it, there won't be any awareness or change around it.
And it's something that families are aware of. They'll bring it up because, well, they're on social media, but also some families, you know, they might do therapy at different places and do different approaches, and they ask the questions, why is it different? You know, why do you do this way, and why do you do that? And so I feel like it's parents that tend to ask the questions most. And obviously at the end of the day, it's their choice in terms of what therapy they engage in with their child, and what they see is as wanting to pursue. But I think it's bringing it back to that ingredients and what is it that's the key part of the therapy. And like you said, there's no research to support DMI, but also their ingredient is there's a lot of passive.
That's right.
Passive. It's the therapist initiating the movement.
Yes.
We know it's talked about reflexes and responses and things like that, which is almost the complete opposite to the evidence-based kind of active, self-initiated, generated ingredients that we know. So look, we can only speak to what we do know, and what we do know is the evidence, and that's what's in front of us.
I think that's important because it is a discussion that often does come up, and that's pushed us to sort of go, okay, well, how can we answer this in a way that that allows us to present the current evidence? And that's the thing; it's really black and white in terms of what the evidence is, and it's the active ingredients, like we keep talking about. It's so important, and it's all cognitive control. It's not reflexive. It's intentional movement, and reflexes are not intentional movements, right? So there's fundamental differences in what we talk about as active ingredients. And like you said, Marissa, it's like the complete opposite of what we're saying. So we need to be really honest with that. We need to keep having these conversations about it. But at the end of the day, if you want something funded under public funding or insurance models or whatever it might be, you just have to be responsible with that funding, and the science, the evidence is what we're going to have to use. And it is so important that we do it because safety is also really, really important in all this. Yeah.
Wow. I sent you quite a curly question there, but I think it was handled pretty well. We obviously have a spot on our website where I think we outline some of the stances and the references and the other information in regards to why there is a difference between that hands-on and hands-off approach. So I'd encourage people to take a look at that if they're interested in that. Now, I was going to touch a little bit on the whole pain and discomfort element, but I think we might have already kind of covered a good deal of that. But and we did speak with Carol Schrader about the pain and discomfort part, and there was a part where she kind of talked about how some pain or discomfort should be tolerated. And I guess my question, and we can cover this relatively quickly, but I mean, when is it okay, and when is it something that can be persevered or pushed through?
Communication. There needs to be that trust relationship in communication, right? So she was very clear, like in early intervention, there's just no place for it. And I completely agree. And I do completely understand and agree is that, you might have a 10, 12, 13-year-old that is able to communicate with you what it is they're feeling. They can locate the pain for you and tell you. But if it's post-op and they have to get up, it's scary. So you do want to take your time and have those discussions. And there may be tears, but we work through that together. But it is that communication that is so important. At the end of the day, we don't want people being upset because that is not healthy. But you can start to have those discussions and negotiations when they're of that age where they can actually reliably communicate with you about what it is that they're experiencing.
Completely agree. It's all about, especially when we worked with children in the post-op periods beforehand, whether it's an inpatient or an outpatient. And obviously the pain is real. They've got legitimate post-operative pain. And it's important we get them moving because obviously they can't stay in bed. We would need to make the gains of the surgery, we've got to get them on their feet and start that rehabilitation process. And a lot of that means dealing with pain. So just communication from a post-operative phase, ensuring there's obviously whether there's medication involved as well, but also just liaising with the child and the family in terms of what is it that they are feeling, but also what is it that they want to do and motivating them. So whether it's iPads or music or, using hydrotherapy as an interim measure. And but at the end of the day, it's about communication because we don't want them to be struggling and upset in sessions because then they're not going to learn.
That's right.
So whether it's post-op or rehabilitation after orthopedic surgery, or it's a child coming in for therapy to improve their walking, regardless of having surgery, it's about that active buying, that communication so that they're enjoying and engaged in that session. Yeah.
But you're always weighing up as well, like is what I'm doing going to be more significant than what it is that they're feeling? And I think that applies to any age. So if you're in early intervention, is what you're doing in that moment worth the fact that that child is screaming and crying? No, never is, because that association, that discomfort, that, all that is terrible. But if you, great point that you made before in terms of post-op, if you've worked in the hospital, I've only done really short stints in the hospital, but you know that if someone's had surgery, you've got to get them up because of DVT, because of lungs, because of all the respiratory health, pressure sores. You have to do it. So is what you're doing outweighing, what the downside of that is? Well, actually in that circumstance, that is life-threatening. So you actually want to get them up. So you're always having to weigh this up. And this is where your clinical wisdom comes into play. And there's so much value in that.
And that's where it's all about communication because, when I did work in inpatients, whether it was adults or children, you had to educate the people as to why they want to get up because otherwise if it was led purely by pain, they probably wouldn't want to.
Yeah, that's right.
But also, whether it is children at times coming for sessions, if they are in pain, then legitimately stopping and being like, what is causing them the pain? Is this an acute pain? And what is it? Why are they distressed?
And if it's behavioural, they're working through those strategies.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is a process in itself. And recognising and labelling that is actually really important.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Thanks.
Now, in the absence of Dr. Thornton, I thought it wouldn't be right of us to not go through to go through a Q&A session, I guess, and not touch on qualitative research. So this one is for you, Dr. Ash. So from a layman's perspective, it's very difficult to get a very a strong grasp on things qualitative. But I guess in a nutshell, like, what does qualitative research bring to the table, and how is it best implemented?
Oh, I love qualitative research, and especially when it is in combination with what you might get really objective outcome measures for. The two of them put together just create this, it's more representative of what actually happened in the clinical trial. I think the clinical trial can show, the numbers and what it might mean. And sometimes that can seem really hard and cold. It's just the numbers. But putting the experiences of participants, people involved in the study, is what brings everything to life. And the two go together beautifully. And we're seeing more and more researchers do that now. They don't just look at the one aspect. There's usually also a qualitative component that brings it all together. And certainly when we did iStride study, which I spoke about back in episode 1, and then Ash was really instrumental in helping us to do the qualitative study for that, which came back in another episode. You put the 2 and 2 together and we've got Healthy Strides Foundation. So it's real, and it allows for implementation. It facilitates that process, and it's something that I would highly advocate for. They're great, and they're great to read as well.
I love it. I remember first hearing, you learn about it at uni, and my research project at uni was qualitative, looking into lower back pain. And I remember interviewing people and getting thoughts and thinking, gee, this is really, obviously it's really important, but it's just a different way of doing research from seeing that quantitative and objective data.
Yes.
But I love how qualitative research often would, gets the consumer's experience, and what it can draw from that, like you said, often changes the way things are implemented, and it changes the direction of things, and it has such a profound impact.
It does, yeah.
It kind of, all the in-between pieces.
It is,
that are so important to, like you said, they go together well.
Yeah.
Because we've got the quantitative data from research that shows us what we should do.
Yep.
And then the qualitative data kind of shows you how to do it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Really bringing the family, or whether it's the therapist, the interviewing, whoever it might be. I think that's where it leads to change for the better.
It comes right back down to the definition of evidence-based practice, right? You've got the 3 pillars, and this sort of completes it in its entirety. So it's beautiful. Dr. Ash, I hope we did you proud of that one, because I love qualitative, thanks to you.
Nice way to come back to the whole evidence-based practice element as well.
Yeah.
So I guess we're just about out of time, but I thought I'd just touch on what future plans there are for the pod. We're nearly at episode 200 now, which is quite an incredible mark and milestone for the pod. I guess, are there any special celebration plans?
God, I haven't thought that far yet. Look, I think there's always room for more growth in what it is that we do. I think at the end of the day, there's no end to how much research there is, and I have this desire to continuously want to keep up. I don't want to be left behind. Like, I remember Diane Damiano saying this. She goes, you always just want to be at the forefront of where everything is at the moment, because if the next thing comes out, the next best thing we're all hoping for that will make the biggest change comes out, if you're already at the forefront, it's not a massive step to then take on that new challenge and do it and implement it. You're not 17 years behind. You're right there. And when she said that, I'm like, yep, that's me. That's where I want to be. And we hope that the podcast helps to keep people staying on that real edge of discovery. So when the newest thing comes out, we can all just do it. And at the end of the day, what happens from there is our children benefit first and foremost, their families then can thrive. And then our job satisfaction is just through the roof high. And we really want that, because like Egmar Longo and Anna Carolina de Campos said, is we want to make our field evidence-based, and we want to be part of that. So look, I don't know where we might be headed. I mean, we'll be in Heidelberg next year. Thank you for inviting us back at EACD. So looking forward to that. And we're just looking forward to continuously being able to just find the next best thing backed by evidence.
I love it.
Yeah,
excited.
You'll come along for
I was about to say, please have me. But what I love is even at AusCPDM, the people that listen to the podcast, and whether they're working in practices where they might be the only therapist in their discipline.
So true.
Or working somewhere rurally, and they can listen to the podcast and feel connected.
Yeah.
Feel connected to a network of evidence-based practitioners who have a passion for that. And I think that brings and gives so much. So.
Yeah. And I think that network from there, I guess, there are the things that sort of are in place that haven't sort of formalized in any way just yet. But because we've got such great networks from so many researchers around the world now, we're really wanting to combine our forces together to create more practical resources and training programs for people so that we can hear the evidence, but we also want to provide people with the skills. So stay tuned for that. I mean, that's about to start. We're sort of developing that at the moment. So I don't know, I think maybe 12 months away, but I'm ambitious, maybe 6 months, I don't know. But we do know that's something that people have been wanting. We want to provide that practical resource because there isn't a lot of that around. Stacey Dusine spoke about that. You can go down the road to do a non-evidence-based course because they're just so readily available. Well, what about the evidence-based ones? And so we want to be part of that solution. So stay tuned for that. I think that will come really soon. Nearly forgot to say that, actually. Nearly forgot about it. But we've been working on it. It's probably why.
I was about to tease that in the next question.
In case I missed that point. I'm glad I remembered that. I don't know why I would have forgotten because I'm literally writing all about it at the moment. How funny. Anyway.
Well, we are most definitely towards the very end of the pod, and I will now need to hand it over to our regular host to finish it up because I don't think I will do it justice as we wrap it up.
Ah, okay. Well, this part we can do.
Yeah, thanks, Ed.
Yeah, thanks. They were good questions. And look, at the end of the day, it's just so important that we can have these opportunities just to have these discussions. We realise we haven't had a Q&A for a while. Normally, Ash and I might wrap things up a little bit, but we've got so many new listeners lately. Like, it's been incredible. So we thought, get to know us a little bit. But we also know that, like you said, Marissa, families ask us these questions. And so how do you communicate it? And sometimes they're really curly and you want to try to say the right thing and not sway them too much in one way, but provide them with really objective information for them to make an informed choice. And at the end of the day, I can't be clearer about that, is that we want families to make an informed choice. And in order to make an informed choice, they just need to be given the information and provided objectively, provided with as much facts as possible as our responsibility. And hopefully what we spoke about today will help with that. And it was great to have your insights into this, Marissa, because I know you do this all the time. Like, you put it into practice every day.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was really great. So to all of our listeners, thank you. You can access any of our episodes through so many different platforms, but of course we've got our website, researchworks.net, where you can find a full listing. You can see all the links to all the papers that we've spoken about. And there's a CPD form there as well you can fill out to keep it as part of your record of your PD requirements. A great thing to do if you ever get audited by, your registration body. So I know that's coming up for people in Australia. So that's available for you. But we've got so many episodes coming up soon as we finish off the year and head towards episode 200. So yeah, have a great week and we'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.
Bye.